Hey everyone, this is my 11th video journal for digital literacies. It's also the final one of the semester. It's gone by super quick, especially with all this craziness. And I have had a very hard time focusing today, so hopefully I will try to keep just as much on track as I usually do, which isn't always on track. But I'll try my best. So this week, the readings were from Kynard, Smith, Puck, Hewitt, Blair, Oswald. So they all focused on disability and online instruction. So online writing instruction and going back and forth with the different discussions about how we should try to open up those gaps for students and what gaps there are for teaching online instruction and what gaps we can try to chip away at. And the breadth of different articles is really interesting, the ones that focus specifically on disability. If you looked at one in particular looked at how disabled students are seen different than students with cultural backgrounds, and then also graduate students looking at our own identities in these online writing instruction communities and how we're trying to navigate all those different communities, and as the author stated, figure worlds, which we've discussed in discourse analysis this semester, which I think is a really good way to think about the different areas that graduate students are bouncing in and out of when they're students and when they're teachers, and what differences those have. The piece I wanted to start off with was the Oswald piece, which focused heavily on the online writing instruction and physical and learning disabilities. I really appreciated, because this is like an internal conversation I've had with myself about the Brueggemann and Palmieri discussion that was brought up later in the piece about how we need to think of disability as something that is enabling and also is a transformative insight as well, instead of a hindrance, instead of something that is a hindrance and needs to be aided or helped. And I think with being a student with multiple different disabilities and an instructor with multiple different disabilities, I have always felt that it's advocacy is what we need more. It's more discussion. It's more bringing it out into the open. It's people aren't having discussions about disability. Only people in the field are having discussions about disability. And of course, families and individuals that either know a person with a disability or have disabilities, that we need to be more broad about. We tend to think of disability as something that's a hindrance, as something that, oh, you need accommodations, you need aid. We don't think of it in the context of an identity, like a cultural background, an ethnicity, or sexuality, or something that's embedded. That's something that we need to put tape on and help this person go through. And I have felt that way going through K through 12. I have felt that way through undergrad, and through certain circumstances also in both of my graduate programs. There have been some people along the way that have been absolutely amazing. it was a lot smaller amounts in K through 12. There was a few teachers that really did try to harness my love for learning and my love for doing things and my creativity, and it got more and more as I went on, but it was hard early on because when I was in K through 12, which was, I started kindergarten in like 1999, so from the late 90s until I graduated high school in 2012, the more assumption with like disabilities like speech impediments was help the student get through as best as they can without putting like a label on the disability. So instead of trying to creatively work with my speech in different ways to still allow me to participate, it was more just like, okay, do what you can do, and then you don't have to do the rest. Which was difficult sometimes because there was a lot of things I always wanted to say in class, and they wouldn't call on me. I would just usually write extra papers or like extra writing or things, which isn't right either. That because of a student with a disability, because they didn't want to work with me, then I was given extra work, which was never really fair. But I did that. But there was certain teachers in high school and early on that, like I said, did work with me. I had a public speaking teacher in high school who said, we will get you to do your speeches that you need to do for this class. We'll come up with different ways. A lot of my speech is anxiety based, which I didn't know as heavily in high school because I didn't get people to test it and to work with it. So I had a public speaking teacher who I just did the speeches for her in an empty room, but she also turned her chair the other way. So I wasn't looking at anybody. I didn't have the extra anxiety, but I still did my speech and I did it pretty well. My stuttering was a lot more severe when I was younger, and I think the main reason for that is because people weren't working with me with it. I had the speech therapy, I had everything that was mandated, but no working that extra step, which I understand. Teachers are overworked to begin with. And I get that. That's a big thing about looking at the teacher's mental health just as much. But teachers help students in a lot of different ways. And students with disabilities shouldn't be seen as that tacked on hindrance. And I think as Bergman and Palmieri said, enabling and transformative insight, that if we see disability as more ingrained, as that we are going to interact with disability personally, all of us at some point in our life, so we have to have it ingrained, we would see more of that enabling and transformative insight all over the place, and then you wouldn't see our disabled students tucked off into special learning classrooms like I was early on. Like I was put into special education classes for my reading because of my speech. So because of my disability, I was put in technically a classroom that was for students with other disabilities, and that was always hard. So I think that's a lot where Oswald is getting at, that real friction between higher ed doing the what is imposed on them by the government for the disability, and then what can really help the students with the disabilities, and what can also help all those other students around them in the classroom. And that's where the discussion gets into the online learning. So how are students with disabilities going to interact well with online learning when all that is done is just those accommodations? And if we don't build those disabled students or students with disabilities into the mesh, instead of just tacking on those accommodations for online classes, those online classes are not going to work, like was discussed in a lot of the articles. And we need to be thinking more broadly about disability, which I also personally try to hammer as well, because I have a more visible disability as speech, so people can see that I have a stutter. Sometimes if I have a really hard block, doesn't happen as much anymore, but still does in certain situations where I lose control of my muscles in my face. I clench my teeth. My eyes will wander because my nervous system is focusing so much on my speech and my speaking that kind of everything else goes and my face will get red and everything else. So that's more one of my visible disabilities. But also, I have clinically diagnosed anxiety and depression, which we don't think of as a disability. We don't think of mental illness as a disability. We also see it as another tacked on issue where students are having to get extra help with if they want to do well with issue with mental health, and that's going to be a lot harder to be able to suss out in that online space as well. Which I think it's so ironic that we make students that, like, if they're having issues with anxiety, depression, PTSD, any type of those mental health issues, which I also suffer from PTSD because of an incident that happened to me when I was a child. But we tell students, okay, if you are having an issue, you need to come to talk to a particular office. You need to come talk to the disability office, and then that'll allow you and your professor or instructor to be able to have a conversation about an extended, an agreed upon attendance policy that is specific for you if you're having issues with coming to class every once in a while because of a health issue. Most students that are in real bouts of depression or anxiety, some of them are having a hard time even getting help for that in particular. And then we expect them to say, okay, I'm coming to you because I have an issue, which is one of the hardest things for people to say is, I actually have this problem, and then I need specific help. We're forcing students to out themselves with their disabilities in order to get help, which I understand for accountability is a certain issue as well. But we need to be able to trust students more, to embed those things more into the classrooms. Like my philosophy is, if a student tells you, I'm sick, I'm not coming to class, I'm not feeling well, I'm sorry, I'll try to get the work done, that I will say, okay, you have a certain amount of time, hope you feel better. I'm not going to question that, oh, this student usually isn't like this way, or this student has acted like this before, so they're probably faking it or something. We do too much of that assumption that we don't give the students enough agency. And we need to give them agency. They're in college. Yes, they're still growing. they're still young to a certain extent, but we need to give them agency, because once you get into college, you are adults, and you need to be able to have that tendency or have that opportunity to fall down and to get back up by yourself and to help yourself. And we need to have those things in place to be able to help students, where negotiating extra absences for certain issues. But we get too hung up in this. If a student doesn't come to class, and if they don't have a note, and if they don't have a specific accommodation through the disability support services, it counts against them because they didn't do the extra things that they needed to go and get the accommodation. Because it's their disability, it's their responsibility. No, it's all of our responsibilities. We put too much force on the students to be able to that it's only them. And yes, sometimes the students will know best for themselves, sometimes they need extra help. But we cannot force that model of accountability as accessibility, because accountability and accessibility are two completely different things. So that's where I think with teaching online also has issues as well, with, of course, with the whole COVID-19 issue, that we had to get into it really quickly. We had a week to turn over our courses and to get online, and it was stressful for a lot of students. Stressful for the students, stressful for the instructors that are also students, and then you get people, particularly one of my supervisors, who focuses more on accountability than accessibility, and that we need to hold those students accountable. We need to do this. These are the rules. This is the first international pandemic that we've had in over a century. Nothing is in this tight little neat box that some people think that they want it to be in. And we can't expect those students to be within those edges of that box, especially when they have disabilities as well. I mean, people that are quote-unquote like normative, which I don't think there really is no normative person, because we need to broaden aspects of disability, but they're still going to have issues right now, and the students with disabilities are going to even have more issues. So we need to give them more room in being able to have those conversations. That's why with my classes right now, I've been really focusing on journaling, not discussion boards where people are going back and forth, but them doing self-reflection, self-analysis. It's an area for them to talk about issues that they're having with their projects, how everything is affecting them right now, things that they need from me. Because I realize that sometimes the going back and forth with the discussion questions can be really stressful for some students, so I tried to eliminate that stress. I'm kind of ending this because it is longer, because I got down my disability and accessibility rabbit hole, which when I get in that, it's hard to get back up. So ending the back article talking about talking about the spaces, which I talked about from the beginning, of how graduate students are trying to navigate those different spaces, as the author states, back those figure worlds. So as a PhD student, I am a student, and I'm also a teacher as well, but also as a PhD student, I am learning at a higher level to become a member of the field. So those different identities and figure worlds, but also the figure world of me being a PhD student and an instructor, a new instructor with a disability, with a stutter, with anxiety and depression, with PTSD, and I also have a form of dyslexia as well. So sometimes that can make it difficult to be able to figure out how to navigate, especially in these crazy times as well. But it really got into looking at like the negotiations between the personal and the professional and how we navigate between those areas with just being a graduate student, but also how that goes into those online spaces. And like I was discussing last week, it's been really difficult to keep my identity and agency as an instructor when we have our own supervisor is lording over us with forcing us to give access to our classes. So this supervisor is able to look over everything that we're doing constantly, and that takes away agency, and then that gives me anxiety, that I'm not trusted, that I need to be watched over, that because we've had to go into this super quickly, that everything I have to do has to be watched. That puts anxiety on my teaching, that puts anxiety on me as a student, and that puts anxiety on me personally. So that person's reaction to how to deal with this has negatively impacted others, and it truly has affected how I interact with students in my online classroom, because it's bad that not bad, but it's sad that I have been more internally focused about like how do I please that supervisor than how do I meet the needs of my students. The needs of my students are very, very, very important to me, but also this looming sense of, am I doing things right? Am I not doing things right? Am I going to get in trouble? So yeah, there's a lot of those interactions back and forth between those. That is it. I'm going to cut it off. I'm sorry for a bit of the rambles. I know this was a longer one this week, and this is the last one. So, have a good rest of your spring, everybody. Bye.